The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Westmoreland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hurst, I just want to ask you a simple question at first. Does Delta belong to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce?
I don't think we do, Your Honor.
Oh, okay. Good. Mr. Hurst, earlier today, I asked Mr. Hochberg about some emails between the Ex-Im Bank staff and Boeing regarding these rules on the economic impact. Did you hear me ask those?
Yes, sir, I did.
You did? How would you characterize his answer that he gave me back as far as this analysis was concerned?
Well, I would characterize it as incomplete. The truth is that the bank is required by its charter to give full consideration to the effects of its actions on employment in the U.S., including industries that would be affected, like Delta is, by the financing of our competitors. But rather than considering those effects on a case-by-case basis, the bank has designed economic impact procedures that include a number of screens that a transaction has to pass through before the bank will even consider what the effects are on the employees of other companies. And what these emails showed was that when the bank designed its procedures following the 2012 Reauthorization Act, it designed them with a view in mind, the clear and intended view in mind, to avoid having to consider individual transactions. And so in the last year, in 2014, of 20 large transactions which the bank considered, averaging over $350 million in aircraft financing each, the bank only considered the effects of one of those transactions out of 20 because of these screens which set up blocks to that consideration. And that one transaction with Aeroflot, the Russian airline, was a fundamentally insignificant transaction to U.S. airlines.
Well, and you know, just from me reading it, just not a lawyer, but just a builder, did it seem like they were what we would call cooking the books on this analysis to you?
They were clearly crafting the procedures so that the analysis that is called for by the statute would very rarely be done. And in fact, one of the documents, this is one of the documents that was produced by the bank in its response to our FOIA request. And it's a chart prepared by Boeing showing all the steps that a transaction must go through before the bank even begins to analyze its economic effect. So you can see there's one hurdle after another, and the effect is that very few transactions will get through that test. And that's intentional.
Yes, sir. If this committee were to craft a reauthorization bill, what would be some of the language in there that Delta or you would recommend for the ability to come up with a good comprehensive impact analysis?
Sir, we think the most important thing that the committee can do and that the Congress can do is to require that the bank actually be a lender of last resort, as Mr. Hochberg repeatedly characterized it. He repeatedly said that the bank is here to provide backup financing. We think that if the Congress were to adopt a reform, the most important reform would be actually to implement that requirement so that a foreign airline seeking Ex-Im support would first have to show that it could not obtain financing in the private market. Of the 20 largest recipients of Ex-Im financing over the last 10 years, virtually every one has access to the private financial market. And that financial market is robust, it's there, it's available, but it's more expensive. From Delta's standpoint, that's the most single important reform.
Would your definition be a bank of last resort, be that they had gone through all their other options as far as financing goes?
Yes. If they certified that they were unable to obtain private financing, then I believe an airline should then be available or accessible, have access to the bank. But if, in fact, an airline has access to private financing, it should not have access to Ex-Im.
You would think that Emirates Air and Qatar and those people would have access to cash, wouldn't you?
Ex-Im has provided about $4 billion of support over the last 15 years to Emirates, and Emirates regularly accesses the private markets. They're highly profitable, they're state-supported.
Or a cash deal, or cash.
Gentleman's time has expired.